Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. This is part number 7 of our Vue.js fundamentals series. All right, so we're still covering some of the basics, but make sure you stay tuned because we are getting to the more exciting stuff as we progress. All right, so in this video, we're actually going to be doing something incredibly useful, and we're going to start learning about events. Okay, the way events are handled in Vue.js. Now, this is a really handy thing because we can start to now create interactive applications once we start learning how to handle events. Up till now, it's been kind of static. Our examples have been kind of weird, but after we handle events and we're learned to actually work with events, this is where the power of Vue.js really comes out and we can start seeing it in action, especially when we tie it in with what we learned in the last video, which is the two-way model binding. You can see how we can modify certain data models using event methods and so forth, and then seeing those update on the screen. So we're going to look at two example exercises in this video where we're going to kind of see how those work in action, how we can actually start to do the beginning of some very useful things using Vue.js. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the code and get started on this concept. All right, so again, this video is focusing around the event handlers inside of Vue.js. Now, you might have used event listeners if you've worked with any sort of JavaScript framework before, or good old vanilla JavaScript. Events are things like click, hover, change, key pressed or key up and stuff like that. These are certain events that occur during the life cycle of an application, and we can do things when when certain actions occur. So for example, when someone clicks a button, we can trigger a certain function or method to happen whenever that button is clicked. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to be looking at how we do in this video using Vue.js. All right, so let's jump on over into it and see how this works. Okay, so here I've got the basic code that we're going to start with today. And if you're jumping into this series, you can go over to GitHub and download the code to use in the application today. So you're going to go over to GitHub, the link's in the description, download the code, and we're currently in part number 7. So head over to that folder, and you're going to start with the start.html, and you should have the code that I've got on screen here in front of me so you can follow along. All right, so here we've got the basic application we've been doing up to this point. We've got our header, the heading that outputs the message, and we've got an input box that is bound to the message model. Okay, so whenever the input updates, it updates the message model. The message model then updates the heading over here and where it's output. Okay, so that's the basic application that we've got going on. Now, to make this a little more interactive, let's start by creating a button. So let's go over here. We're going to go to button. We're going to create basically an HTML button. It's going to say press me. And then we're going to go ahead and just give it a class to give it some style. All right. So because we are pulling in Bootstrap, we can give it a BTN and BTN primary. And then the button should say press me in the text. Okay, so here's the basic application, what it looks like. You've seen hello Vue world, hello Vue. This updates automatically, nothing fancy here. But currently the button doesn't actually do anything, right? The button is just kind of a dead button. So how do we get Vue.js to handle the clicks on this button, to do certain things when a click happens on this button? Let's explore that. So all of the event handlers are with Vue.js occur on the v-on directive. Okay, so every directive in Vue has this Vue dash, and this is the Vue-on directive. Now think about this similar to in JavaScript we have a method called on, and we would do like on click or on mouse over. Is that what I think it is? I can't remember. Anyway, but on mouse over for like hovering, on click, on key up, different things like that. This is basically the same thing. You're using the Vue directive, but you're saying it's the on method, okay? And then you can tell it which event to listen to. So in this point, we'll do click, all right? So on click, it's going to perform some sort of method. And that's what we do here is we do equals, and then we give it the name of the method that we want to trigger, okay? Now, before we finish this, let's talk about how we create methods in Vue.js, because we actually haven't covered that yet. So all of the methods are initialized here when you initialize the full Vue object, okay? So we set up our element, we set up all the data that we need, and then we can pass in another thing here called methods. And this will be all of the methods that our application wants to use. Okay, so we can give it a method any name down here, and then we can trigger one of these methods when the user clicks this button. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to create a counter. Okay, and this is a very basic example, but I'll show you another example later on. I don't want to say advanced because it's not hard, but it's a more useful example at the end of this video. But let's start with a counter. So let's just have a counter here where we basically display count to the user. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do count equals count and then show the count. Let's go ahead and initialize a new count model. It's going to be equal to 0 at the beginning. And so when we first set this up, it's basically going to say count 0. But every time we click the button, let's add 1 to the count. Okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a method called count up. And we're going to set that method equal to a function. And we'll just create an anonymous function in here. And we're just going to say this.count plus equals 1. And that's just going to add 1 to the count. So every time we run this count up method, it's going to take the value of count and then add 1 to it, okay? And of course, because count is bound to up here, we should see that number update automatically. So let's go ahead and give this a try. We can't give this a try yet because v.onClick is equal to method. We actually need to tell it which method to run, of course, and we're going to tell it to run this count up method. So let's go ahead and do that. Count up, and now we can save and run this in the browser. Okay, so over here in the browser, I'm going to go ahead and refresh. Looks like we have a small error, so let's just come back over here. Oh, we had, that was just my autofill. Something happened there. That looks correct. So let's go ahead and go back over here, refresh. Okay, so count is equal to 0. Let's go ahead and click press, and every time you press it, it's going to add 1 to the count, okay? And this can go up forever, and it's going to continue adding 1 to the count every single time. So awesome. Let's go ahead and just comment out this. We don't need this input right now. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. So now what if we want to have multiple methods? What if we want to count up or count down? Well, we can do that. Let's go ahead and just set that up. Let's have a button here that says count up. And then let's add another button down here. In fact, let's just go ahead and copy it. And we're going to count down, okay? So this is going to subtract 1 like this, and we're going to do the same thing here. Oops. Let's add a second method, and we're going to call this method count down. Okay, and then this will obviously do the same thing, but it's going to subtract 1 from the current count. So this allows us to set the count, to add 1 to the count, to subtract 1 from the count, and we'll have 2 different buttons that allow us to modify the value of count. So let's go ahead and save that and go back to the browser. You can see count is equal to 0. We can add to the count, and then we can subtract from the count. We can go negative, and we can modify the count just like that. So you can see that we can actually start getting into some pretty advanced functionality with almost no code. I mean, we've literally created 2 quick little methods, and we tied them using this very, very basic syntax, right? Okay, so that's all it takes to start working with events in Vue.js. And it actually gets a little bit easier. For example, we can actually use a shortcut. Instead of this v.on, we can actually just do an @ sign. Okay, and so this kind of makes sense if you think about like @click, like when a click happens to do something. So we can do @click, and then it tells it to run this count up, count down. These should run exactly the same as before. It works exactly the same way. It's just another way to do the same thing, and it reads a little bit easier. So whenever you see that @ sign in your Vue.js code, that's what it is. And then don't forget that we also had, well, we're going to talk about this in the next. So we're going to tie this all together, and I want to give you one other little exercise that we can do that kind of ties in the model view binding a little bit more. And then also the v.bind method, and also what we just learned today with the actions, okay, the events. So let's now take this. In fact, let me go ahead and save this. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's start on a new type of, on a new kind of more practical example, a small little exercise. Okay, so over here what I want to do is we're actually now going to create something where we have, for example, we're going to have our message up here. Let's go ahead and get our message back. And then we're going to tell the user to visit a certain URL, right? And we're going to have a URL that you can visit. But what I want to do is I want to make a link to another website, and I need the full URL in order to do that. But then what I want to display to the user is what we'll call a humanized URL. It's a little bit cleaner URL. We don't need the http:// all that kind of stuff at the beginning. So this is going to allow us to kind of modify an object and then output it to the user. Okay. So let me just show you a little bit what we're talking about. So what we're going to do over here is let's go ahead and get our input back. So let's go ahead and get rid of one of these, and let's get an input, and we're going to do a type of text so we can get text. And what we're going to get is we want the user to give us a URL. Okay, so they're going to put a URL in here, and then we're going to process the URL and make a link out of it, a link like this. All right, so it's going to be similar to this. So let's say visit link name, and then it's going to have the full URL in here. But we want this to be a human URL. Okay, so an easy to read URL. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do type equals text, and then we're going to do a class of form control just to make it look nice. And then what we can do is we're going to tie it to a model. Okay, so we can collect the value of the input. So it's kind of tying in several different things that we have. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an item called URL. We're going to make URL empty at first because we don't currently have a URL to begin with. So we're going to set it equal to an empty item, okay? And that'll mean that this, let's tie it to the URL model. And let's go ahead and close this. So now we've got an input here. And this input will start off empty. It'll allow us to type in a URL. And then we want to click, when you click the button, we want you to then process it basically, okay? So that's what we're gonna do here. We're gonna take, when we press this button, we're gonna say, humanize me, okay? And then on click, what we're gonna do is, let's go ahead and get rid of these methods here, and we're gonna say humanize URL. All right, and set that equal to a function, like that. Okay, so when we click this button, let's go ahead and we're going to humanize the URL, and we'll keep everything exactly the same. So when we click this button now, it's going to process that humanize URL method, which is down here. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to take that URL, and we're going to obviously continue to store that URL. It's stored over here in the URL because it's happening from the model. This input here is tied to the URL model, so it's already going to have the full URL here when we click the button. And then what we want is we're going to want a second item maybe called clean URL. Okay, and then clean URL we can set equal to nothing at the beginning, but then it will obviously be set to something here in a second. So whenever we humanize the URL, what we're going to do is we're going to take a URL like http://devmarketer.io. This is kind of a normal URL. And of course, this is kind of a silly example, but we want to get rid of any trailing slashes, and we want to get rid of the HTTP at the beginning, okay? So it just looks like that. That's basically our goal. This is going to be a humanized URL. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to store that humanized URL in the clean URL, our full URL in this URL, and this method is what's going to process that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. What we're going to do here is we're going to say this.clean URL is equal to this.url.replace, and this is where we're going to get rid of that HTTP. Okay, so we're going to do replace, and we're going to use, this is a regular expression. So let's go ahead and say, hey, at the beginning, that's what this thing means. This little caret means, hey, this has to happen at the very beginning of the string. HTTP, and then we can do S ? To say that sometimes it's HTTPS, sometimes it's not. S, that's what the question mark is after S. And then we'll do the colon, and then you would do //. And of course, because this is a irregular expression, we have to do backslashes here. Okay, just to cancel it out. And then to end the regular expression, we do another slash. So it looks a little dirty, but this basically just says, hey, get rid of the HTTP, maybe HTTPS, // at the beginning of the item. That's what this says right here, okay? So this anyway, that's the way this works. And then we want to replace it with just nothing. So we'll just do an empty string. Okay, and then also what we're going to do is we're going to replace the trailing slash at the end. So we're going to do a another slash. So this might be confusing again. So we always wrap the regular expressions inside of 2 slashes like this. And then, so that's kind of what we got here. But then we actually want to get rid of the last slash. So we have to put another slash inside of here. But as you can see, this isn't recognized. So then we have to put a backslash to cancel it out. So all these slashes together basically just mean that you're getting rid of this 1 slash, okay? And then this $sign just tells us that it's it has to be at the very end of the string in order to get rid of it. Otherwise, it'll get rid of it at the beginning or something. Okay? And then what we want to do with that is we want to replace it with, don't worry about if you don't understand regular expressions. That's a whole thing for another day, so don't worry about it. This is the code that you need, though. All right? So we're going to replace that with an empty string. All right? So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, grab the URL, and the URL will be in the input. Get rid of the HTTP or the HTTPS. Also get rid of that last slash at the end. So we just have that clean URL and then store it in the clean URL model, okay? And all of this happens in this function, which happens when they click the button. So we're tying in this click model with the V model, and we're also outputting it here with this binding. And what we actually want to do now is we want to output this clean URL to the user. So we're going to put that over here. Clean URL. So the user is going to get this clean URL. So let's go ahead and click save. Let's come back over here and refresh. And you can see now that if we did http://devmarketer.io and we click humanize me, it now cleaned up the URL and made it look nice, right? Now the problem with this is that the URL doesn't work. We need to actually get the URL in there. So let's go ahead and add the URL. And that means we need to modify this href. And if you remember how to do that from before, you can. We do, oops, sorry. The way we do that before is we do v-bind and then we do href, right? And then set it equal to URL. Just like that. Now, well, let's go ahead and just test this real quick. Refresh, do http://dev-marketer.io. So if we click this, you can see that when we click it, it actually should take us over to devmarketer.io. And here we are. So we're on devmarketer website. So it's looking good. Okay, let's go ahead and head back, and you can see that everything works just like this. So we now tied in the bind with the model and the event click. Everything is working correctly. For those of you guys that might catch this from before, you can actually just use the semicolon or just the normal colon here at the beginning. So it's just colon href URL, and then we have our clean URL here. So all of this, that's kind of actually some pretty advanced functionality, lots of little things at play to do something really simple. But with Vue.js, it actually is really simple. If I wasn't sitting here teaching it, we could have done all of this here in a minute, like about a minute, maybe 2 minutes. It's incredibly easy. There's hardly any code. There's very, very little code going on here, which makes it super, super easy, okay? So now that we've learned a little bit about how to use events, how to use model binding, and how to do how to use all these other directives, now we can move on and start talking about more about properties, computed properties, watched properties, and some other stuff before we start moving on to real-world projects. And when I say properties, I'm basically talking about these items right here. If we need to do something more advanced than just kind of these more static items, we can actually manage and manipulate those. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few videos, okay? It's how we can do more advanced stuff with our models right here, okay? So make sure you stay tuned for that. Hopefully you guys are learning a lot. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to leave comments below. And you can reach out to me on Twitter as well, _JA Curtis. I'd love to to hear from you guys, and I try to help you best I can on there as well. So don't be afraid to reach out to me over there, as if you have any further questions, or just give me a shout out and say how much you're appreciating it. Anyway, thanks so much for staying tuned, guys. A little bit longer video today, but we did cover 2 different exercises, and I hope that these exercises are starting to put Vue.js into practice, where you can kind of start to see the practical implications of using Vue.js and where we can start doing some cool stuff. All right, we'll talk about some more advanced stuff down the road and how we can really use some stuff that's more commonplace, some really good uses for Vue.js. But you can see that we're now covering enough material that we can really start putting it to use and doing things that you might actually see happening in the real world. And we can do those now in our examples. So anyway, hope you're really enjoying the series. Reach out to me if you guys are appreciating it. I'd love to hear from you guys. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.